living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Is there a child you care about, a child you love? Hi there, I'm Dr. Carol, and you're listening to Relationship Prescriptions. Jesus loved children. There's something about a child, their face, their love, their possibility, and your heart is just stirred. Today, we are going to talk about some children who need a lot. Children who do not have the kind of opportunities that you and I probably take for granted. Imagine a child born with birth defects or a child getting seriously injured, but they don't have access to the kind of care you and I probably take for granted. My guest today is Peter Lubnik, Executive Director of Bethany Kids. Now, Bethany Kids is a community of surgeons, nurses, rehab professionals, business leaders, social workers, and teachers who believe that children matter and that they deserve the very best care possible. But these are people in Africa, 6 countries across Africa. Children there have birth defects and injuries that are just like children everywhere. But until Bethany Kids came along, many of these children did not get the kind of care that we would take for granted, most of us listening to this podcast. But Bethany Kids is making a difference. I am really excited to share this story with you. Peter Lubnik is the executive director. I'll let him tell you a bit more about Bethany Kids and what they do and how he became involved. But just imagine a child that you love or care about being in a circumstance like this. And let your heart be open. Here's my conversation with Peter Lubnik. Well, Peter Lubnik, this is a joy and a pleasure. This is going to be a fun conversation. Just a huge thank you for spending this time with us.
Oh, well, my pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
As I have found out a little bit about you and Bethany Kids, very little bit, I think we could probably have hours of stories. I am looking forward to sharing some stories with our listeners. But before we get to that, you have been all over the world. Now you're headquartered in Africa with Bethany Kids. But how did all of that come to be? How did you get into this life?
Yeah, great question. So I should say that the last 8 years of my life, I have lived in the Middle East. For much of that, I was pastoring a church. And I was trying to, on the side, I was working with a consulting firm to help NGOs tell their stories well. Because as I know you hold deeply, that the power of stories are really transformative. So I was helping a range of NGOs, pastoring a church, teaching at a school there. And then out of that process, I came in contact with Bethany Kids a couple of years ago, and we did some work for them. And then I heard last year that they were looking for a new executive director. And I thought, that is something I would love to devote my life to really give my time and energy all in one place to try to see the world transformed through medical care to kids. So after years of, as you said, traveling around the world, I think 80 plus countries over the last few years, I decided to sort of commit myself to this cause. And of course, the interesting thing is that I committed to this medical cause in the midst of a global pandemic.
Exactly.
So it has been a whirlwind of a year. In fact, the first week, I was actually at a conference away from my home in the Middle East when I was about to start the work. I was supposed to go back, and it was going to have 5 or 6 months to sort of wrap things up in the Middle East. And then basically became stranded due to the pandemic. And so my first week of work with Bethany Kids, I was using a borrowed laptop. I was in someone else's house, and I was living out of a backpack. So a bit of a chaotic start, but here we are, exciting things happening. And it has been such a life-giving 6 or 7 months now.
Well, Peter, prior to the last 8 years, what about your previous growing up, your walk with God, just the life experiences? Was there anything that pointed forward now in retrospect that you can look back and say pointed forward to you being in the mission field and serving God in this way?
Yeah, I think, it's always this sort of slow incremental things that happen over time, and you don't always see how the pieces fit together. So I know that when we were finishing up university, my wife and I, we both had a sense that we wanted to serve internationally at that time. We were offered a position in Western Europe, working with a large NGO there. And then things were changing rapidly as we had got married, we finished school, all of that. And we ended up actually becoming pastors in Canada for a number of years. And I would say each kind of moment throughout this, my own personal history, when I was a kid, I moved around a lot. So the sense of geography being a barrier was not really a thing. I also really sensed that the gospel was always practical, that it had to result in transformed lives here and now. And I remember always thinking, like, we've got to be, as a church, we've got to be more than an airport lounge of people with their tickets in hand waiting to get out of here. We've got to be the kind of people who are really engaged in mission, engaged with our neighborhoods, trying to bring about the love of Christ to all we encounter. So we tried to model that as we pastored in Canada for many years. And then, of course, at our time in the Middle East. And now, of course, my work is predominantly serving people across Africa. I myself am currently living in Canada, so I'm on the North American side of the ocean. But the vast majority of our staff, we really try to make a point to ensure that all the people who lead our work in the different hospitals, the surgeons, they are all serving in their home countries. That's been a big kind of strategy for us, which I think has served us well in the middle of a pandemic. So the surgeons, the country directors, if they're from Kenya, it's led by a Kenyan. Our surgeons in Sierra Leone, it's someone from Sierra Leone, and we really hope that continues to be our pattern, so we can invest in local leadership in each of the countries in which we work.
That is already starting to paint a picture that is so encouraging. But I'm sure that many of our listeners are just hearing, Kenya and Sierra Leone and Africa, and you're in Canada and Bethany Kids and medical work. We've alluded to all this. So, Peter, what is Bethany Kids?
Yeah, so Bethany Kids started like a lot of other mission organizations in many ways, where there was an American surgeon who had on his heart to say, I have skills that I feel like I could use. So he spent many of his years, decades of his life in Kenya doing pediatric surgery, surgery for kids who had very little other options. And out of that process, what happened was a realization that it is not sustainable to just have one foreign doctor here. We've got to find a better model. So many years before I ever arrived, the model was shifted to begin training local surgeons. So the first kind of major program heart of everything we do is that we recruit and train surgeons from all across Africa at our training hospital in Kenya. They come to us for 3 or 5 years, depending on their experience. They train with us, and when they leave that hospital, their sort of self-identity is that they're very much missionary surgeons returning to their home countries. So they have a sense of calling and passion to say, I'm going back to Madagascar, and I'm not just going as a trained professional, but I'm also going as a missionary. So we really try to instill that in all of the trainees in our program. So that's kind of the first line, we'll say, in our program. That is, we train surgeons. And then what happens is, of course, they go back to their home countries. In many cases, they're now the only trained, accredited pediatric surgeon in the country. Wow. And so the possibility of them just spending the rest of their lives in a cushy urban hospital certainly is appealing, or even moving to a place like Canada or the US. So we decided many years ago that we would try to incentivize and encourage any of our graduates, if they were willing to serve in an under-resourced part of their home country, if they were willing to return to their homeland, the country that they were fluent in, spoke the language, if they were willing to return there, and serve on the margins of that society, serve the people who had really been forgotten in their nation, whoever those people were, then we would work with them for as long as it took to support them and their family so that they had a fair wage, even if they were serving in a mission hospital or a government hospital. We'll make sure that they have a top up so they're given a fair wage. So we'll try to take care of them. And then also, as we take care of them, any surgery, any child that comes to them that can't afford surgery, we'll pay for it. So we pay for thousands of surgeries every year. We perform thousands of surgeries every year. And we do that in 6 different countries. And in each time, we've got the trainee who's graduated our program. We invest in that person. So we don't own the hospital. We don't own the land. We invest in people first. So we've got the graduate or the trained pediatric surgeon. We support them personally. Then we take care of the children who can't afford care, who need surgery. And then the kind of third branch that, particularly in a country like Kenya, where we're really growing, is beyond the surgical intervention. What else do these kids need to get back on their feet and have a whole and full life? And in what ways can we ensure that their family is no longer burdened by medical challenges? So we've developed a wheelchair program in Kenya. We've developed an extensive rehab and physio program for children who maybe have been born with a congenital issue or a mobility issue, so that those children have as many opportunities as they can to literally get back on their feet, and so that their families are not financially burdened to care for these children over time.
That is a beautiful paradigm, and can make such a difference. Just from what you've already shared, the medical part of me is really intrigued. On that medical side of things, I've worked both in small rural hospitals and clinics and in the cushy tertiary care, centers. And one of the questions I have personally from a medical standpoint is, what's the quality of care that these kids get in Africa under the trained surgeons that have gone through Bethany Kids program? How does it compare? Mm-hmm.
So we try to ensure that our surgeons, the ones that we have trained, are really offering the absolute best in care. So, and some of those surgeries can be quite complex. But as you've correctly sort of hinted at, we also serve in rural hospitals. And so there are often times where we have limitations in terms of resources. And there are barriers that we're constantly trying to work past. So sometimes we as Bethany Kids have invested in some tools within the surgical theaters so that the surgeons have the right equipment. Sometimes, it comes to medicine, we're having to find creative ways to get medicine to the kids that need it. Of course, this year, PPE and personal protective equipment, that has been a challenge to make sure that everyone has the right amount so that they can care for their patients. The other thing that we do try to ensure is that our surgeons are part of sort of continued learning practices beyond their graduation. Because if you're serving in a rural or remote setting, what can often happen is you don't have the rubbing of shoulders with really high quality professionals where you can learn from. So just a few weeks ago, we did a surgical conference for all the surgeons across Africa who work with us to try to provide care. Now, myself, I was speaking at this, but I'm not a trained surgeon. So we had 2 trained surgeons who are excellent in their field of pediatric surgery, and they're both from North America. So we are always trying to feed into the individual, that surgeon, to ensure the excellence of care is as much as we can control it in terms of their proficiency, their capacity as surgeons. So we certainly don't want to ever sort of leave the surgeon at graduation and say, well, that's all the learning you need. You're good now. We want to ensure they have, as much as possible, lifelong learning opportunities.
Awesome. I'd love to hear some stories. So maybe, Peter, we can spend a few minutes talking about, some of the kids that your programs have helped, maybe, the impact on their families and communities, and then some of the surgeons that have been through your program and are now treating children in Jesus' name.
Yeah. So obviously, as I said, every year there are thousands of kids who get surgery, and in general senses, of course, I could say that many of them. I read a newsletter just this last week where The family had to close down their business until the child got well, because the family went with the child to the hospital because it wasn't in the same city. We could spend a long time talking about those stories. What I would love to share to begin with is a story of someone who was a child in our program and who's now employed with us, because you can kind of see the full picture. It's not just a snapshot, but we're talking decades of investment. So this woman's name is Francesca. And Francesca was born in a Maasai community. So if you watch National Geographic, or if you pay attention to sort of television, the Maasai people are very iconic. They wear these red robes and a long staff. And when people think of Kenya, that's often the image that they think of, the Maasai people. So she was born in a Maasai community, and she was born with spina bifida. And for her, that meant, of course, there was some visual challenges. Like visually, you could see that she had some mobility issues. But also it meant that she had bladder issues, continence management issues, that she wasn't able to control her bladder the way a normal child or another child would be able to do that. The problem, of course, was that immediately upon birth, the family saw that this young woman was a curse. And that the deep held belief in her family was that if she was a curse, the sooner they got rid of her, the better. Wow. This was not a Christian family. This was a family who believed in sort of curses being generational. So in fact, what happened was the family tried to kill her as an infant. And so she was taken away. Another family member fled with her, and she survived until her teenage years. But as she said to me, she was deeply depressed and unhappy, because to the point that she was a teenager, she had, in her words, had never, ever had a single day where she was dry. She was always soaked in her own bodily fluids because she had no medical resource to help her with her bladder control and with the various side effects that she had because of spina bifida. So she told me she tried to kill herself, and she wished that the family had been more thorough in killing her when she was a kid. That's the place of despair that she was living with as a teenager. And then she got in touch with a church, and somehow this church connected with her. And she was not raised in a church, but somehow a church entered her life, or she entered the life of the church. And for the first time in her life, she had a real sense of hope, because they said, listen, there are people who are in this country trying to save the lives of kids like you. They will help you. So she got connected with Bethany Kids through this church. And a lot of the churches, particularly in Kenya, we are well known. They know that they can refer patients to us. And so she was able to access care through us. And over the course of some years was able to be given the right kind of care that she needed, so that she was able to control her bladders, and she was able to care for herself. Now, fast forward to when I met her in February. She is currently a full-time employee with Bethany Kids, and she leads a continence management program for other kids who were just like her when she was young, who feel lost, feel abandoned, don't understand why they can't control their bowels in the same way. And now she's able to give life to the people of her community. And to me, just such a beautiful kind of full circle story of one individual. And again, we're talking thousands every year. But here's one individual who chose to now spend her whole life giving back to her community.
That is a beautiful story. And besides spina bifida, what are some of the other more typical or frequent challenges that you help these kids with?
So of course, there's a lot of acute conditions. Someone comes in with a broken leg, a hernia. Sure. There's a lot of common conditions that with one surgical intervention, realistically, the child is back on their feet. Burn patients, that's quite common. Some of the more complex cases would be things like, as you say, spina bifida, also hydrocephalus. Those two, as they pair together, would be very common because of the sort of long-term mobility and capacity issues that they have. And so, of course, early surgical intervention becomes really key. And if we can find ways to provide that and then the right kind of rehab, we're able to see a much better sort of improvement on life. So those would be common, but every country is also quite unique. So, for example, our surgeon in Sierra Leone, the most common sort of patient that he is seeing would be burn patients.
Wow.
And particularly in his assessment, COVID has increased the amount of pediatric burns that he's seeing. And that's because more people are spending time in limited spaces physically. So rather than kids playing outside all day while a parent is cooking at home on an open fire, children are all at home near that open fire. And so the chances of having a burn go up dramatically. So that's a place like Sierra Leone. Whereas something that we're seeing quite unique in the country of Madagascar, sadly, a very common surgery, and remember, we are pediatric surgeons, that is, we take care of children. A very common condition, if I can put it like that, is that there's a lot of children who become pregnant in Madagascar that are coming to the hospitals that we serve. So they are very young. There are all sorts of additional complications because they are young children. And so oftentimes that involves a C-section. But again, a C-section on what is, biologically still very much a child. So that's in Madagascar, and that has to do with a number of sort of layers of culture. Every country, we're seeing different kinds of realities. Most commonly, spina bifida, hydrocephalus. That is really where a lot of our early work has been done and continues to be a lot of the patients we serve, particularly in post-surgical care with rehab.
Oh, as an OBGYN, your brief mention of the children in Madagascar, that just tugs at my heart very, very, very much. Peter, how do you and the organization of Bethany Kids, how do you see this work correlating with the gospel? I know that is a big part of your heart. You are a Christian organization, but let's just get real explicit about what that looks like practically for the people that connect with Bethany Kids.
Absolutely. So on the ground, I would say the first thing, and we go back to that model way, so there's kind of 3 tiers of our work. The first thing is when we train our surgeons, we're training them in addition to proper and advanced surgical practice. We're also training them as missionaries. So we are part of sort of surgical conferences. It's accredited college, but it's also part of sort of a Bible movement with surgeons. So there's a Bible component built right into the curriculum so that each of these surgeons, as they return home, they are in many ways, as I said at the beginning, they are missionaries. That is, when they care for the children in front of them, when they care with the families, they are actively sort of trying to model and live out the gospel. The result has been that many of the children we serve, even if they come from different faith communities, are finding Jesus in these hospitals in a very practical and very real way. Then additionally, as we kind of hire staff, we, in a number of countries, have brought on chaplains so that there's full-time spiritual work being done. We also try to always mobilize local communities. So in Kenya, which again is where our program is the most robust, we have a network called a Disciplers Network with hundreds of women who are doing training with us, who are really seeing themselves as local missionaries to their home communities, who, among other things, are part of sort of early diagnosis of childhood, maybe congenital challenges, but they're also there in a spiritual capacity, because we want to make it very clear that if you're hurting, if you're hungry, if you've been forgotten, abandoned, that the church is a place that cares about you. And if you're lost and you give birth to a child and you don't understand and things look different and you're not, go to a hospital. But also, if you need that kind of moral support, that psychological, emotional support, the people in churches are called, each one of us have been called to have our love be so abundant, so sacrificial, so evident that as a church global, the one thing that we should be known for biblically is our love. That's right. And we try to make sure we're part of that with local churches, with chaplains. In the West, something we've been trying to do this last year is really communicate the stories of the kids whose lives are being transformed through the lens of Scripture, through the lens of the gospel. So every month since the spring, we've published a devotional guide so that people, churches, Bible studies can have this guide. And it goes through biblical questions and you have scripture to look at. But in each case, we've included the story of one of the children whose lives have been transformed so that we can really, even from the Western perspective, see that this is a spiritual act, that children are finding Jesus. There are, people are repenting or changing directions, if you want to put it that way, from a life away from God to a life with God. And so we've really tried to ensure that even in our marketing, quote unquote, we are very clear that we are about transformed lives. We've also just released an Advent guide. And this is just a tool that whether you are in Africa at one of our hospitals or you are in a church in North America, every day there's a devotional for you to work through as we anticipate the Advent season, as we work towards Christmas Day. So we try to ensure that on every front, from a surgical training to a program to even the way we tell our stories, are wrapped in every way with Jesus and his life-transforming power.
I love your emphasis on transformed lives. God created us as integrated human beings, physical, emotional, relational, spiritual. Jesus came to transform whole people. It's all of the above. Beautiful model. How has COVID-19 impacted? You've briefly alluded to that with the personal protective equipment, but just how has that impacted the work with the surgeons in Africa and maybe your operations? What does that look like?
Sure. So right away, we as a medical organization, we knew that as soon as in late February, we were already aware that this was going to get bad and this was going to be very complex. And so we were already trying to set things in motion so that we were as prepared as possible. And as I said at the beginning, because all of our surgeons serve in their home country, the first thing I would say was we never at any point had to recall people, or we were never adversely affected by the shutdown of international flights because our surgeons live in their home country. No one had to run away from the field. Everyone is serving their home country. Where we ran into challenges would be, of course, a lot of children were unable to access the healthcare that they normally would because of local shutdowns, which meant that it was delayed access to surgery. And of course, delayed access can sometimes mean increased complications. So we did see a dip in the surgical volume that our surgeons were able to perform, and that is because of local shutdowns. We did pivot a number of our programs to make them safer during the pandemic. So one of the programs, again, I'll use Kenya as an example. One of the programs that we have run there for years is a mobile clinic. That mobile clinic goes around the whole country, following up with previous patients, following up with people to ensure they have ongoing care, training parents and caregivers, and early diagnosis of other children who might need care. Now, as you can imagine, in a pandemic, that program would be very dangerous to just randomly move a group of people. That would be sort of a super spreader situation. So we right away shifted that. We were using technology. We were doing rehab sessions online. We were doing all sorts of phone call visits with people across the country. Our mobile clinic team, we were starting to deliver necessary medicines across the country where possible. Our assistive technology team, they have been either trying to produce local components of wheelchairs or importing wheelchairs or a combination of the two. They have been on the sort of cutting edge of assistive technology. So they began to use that innovative design to produce face shields for our surgeons and our other employees, so that even within our organization, we are producing PPE where necessary. So right away, there's a big shift where the organization, as quickly as we could, tried to take care of people. We have at our hospital in Kenya, we invested in a pediatric ward. The hospital is another organization, but we have been their pediatric ward for many, many years. And that's where we do all of our training. So in that hospital, we have an entire ward that we built, that we finance, that we really manage. And in the midst of the pandemic, as we saw children who were less able to access care, so surgical volume dropped, there was the threat of COVID. We said to the hospital, listen, we know this is a pediatric ward, but because it's isolated from the rest of the hospital, we will move our services to a smaller part of the hospital. You can use the entire wing, the entire ward for a COVID crisis center. Adults, children, whoever, use the space, and let's make sure we are being as careful as we can to take care of the population. So we used our space, we used the talents in the room, whatever we had, we tried to pivot, transform, so that very quickly we could continue to serve. Where I would say the biggest challenges have been, because I feel on the program side, it's been exciting. The challenges have been historically an organization like ours. I would go to a church, I would preach a sermon, and then afterwards, maybe people would say, hey, I heard your sermon. Like, I want to get connected. How can I help? And sometimes those people in churches have become donors for decades because someone showed up in church and gave a sermon. So this year, as you can imagine, that's not so possible. You're not having small talk in a lobby. I've not been able to get out to churches in person. So instead, it's kind of shifted to the digital realm where there's a lot of podcasts, a lot of sermons online, trying to resource people in a new way. But certainly financially, that has been a challenge to try to connect with new donors. And it's pushed us to be as innovative as we can be right now.
Well, that is one reason you're on today, Peter, and that is a perfect transition. One of the things that I really enjoy doing here on our podcast regularly is every now and then highlighting an organization that is making a difference for people that you need our help. And I want to come right out and say, as a doctor and as a minister, I am just thrilled to see what Bethany Kids is doing and how you are leading this organization. So how can our listeners get involved?
Well, thank you for that. First of all, thank you so much. We do need all the help we can get. The first thing, of course, we are approaching our Christmas season. And for any NGO, this is a critical fundraising time. And we know that there are some people out there who've lost their jobs and who won't be able to give the way they've given in the past. So for those of us who have work, those of us who have financial stability right now, if you're listening to those people, we need your help because not everyone can give this year. So if you're able, we need donations. We need people to come and support us financially. They can give online. They can go to bethanykids.org and they can donate. The second thing, and this is for everybody, whether they are financially okay right now or whether they personally been adversely affected by the pandemic, this is a cause that requires awareness. It's a cause that takes place in many ways across the world in countries that many people will never get the chance to visit. So we need people to lend us their voice, to amplify the voices and the stories of the people we serve, and to try to raise a public awareness, a public concern around medical care across Africa and the training of surgeons. And I hope that the churches and individuals would see this story and say, I want to become a sponsor of one of those missionaries, those people that you're helping in Cameroon or Madagascar or Uganda. I want to back that medical missionary. I want to help them and support them. And I want to, exchange letters with them. I want to be there as a prayer partner. These are things that we're in desperate need of. People who are financially supporting, people who are amplifying our story and sharing it with their communities, and then people who are partnering with us in prayer and even exchanging letters with the people on our front lines, the surgeons who can always use a word of encouragement.
And people can connect that way at bethanykids.org as well?
Absolutely. So on bethanykids.org, we have a range of resources that we've put there. Of course, there's a contact form that will come directly to me. So if anyone has any questions, I will be there and answer that question. We've also put on there types of fundraisers because everybody's different. And the last thing I'll say, I guess, and it has to do with this combination of fundraising and awareness, is this last year we've launched an ambassadors program, and that is brand new for us. Part of the idea was we didn't always want the same faces representing this cause. And particularly, we didn't want my face representing this cause. We want to make sure people in communities across this world are sharing this story with their own community. So we started an ambassador program, and we have 11 new ambassadors that started over the course of the summer who are volunteer kind of PR people. They're with us. They're trying to champion our cause. They're sharing our story. So that is, I guess, another way people can participate. But regardless, even if someone's heard this and thought there's a thing he didn't mention I'd love to help with, maybe it's not money, maybe it's something else, we are eager for whatever help we can get. So if someone wants to email me, I will happily respond and try to partner with whoever we can partner with.
Well, we will make sure that the link to Bethany Kids' website is in the show notes for this episode. And I just want to personally say, Y'all come. I think Peter and Bethany Kids is a great organization to partner with at this holiday season specifically. A great big thank you, Peter, and a huge God bless you and the work that you and your organization is doing.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for you and for lending us this time with you to really share this story. We're so deeply appreciative of it.
As an OBGYN, just thinking of those children, 11, 12, 13 in Madagascar, he didn't give ages, but I know as an OBGYN, as soon as a young girl enters puberty, physically she can get pregnant. And sadly, in that culture, that's happening far too often, far too young. Or children getting burned and without proper medical care, the rest of their life being affected, or born with a birth defect, such as spina bifida, and now being able to access care that allows them to function. Not with U.S. people going over there, but trained in their own countries, serving in their own countries. A great model that I believe fits with what God intended the body of Christ to be about. So, again, I just want to invite you to go to bethanykids.org. And if this has opened something in your heart, I want to invite you to support them. Certainly doing awesome work for Jesus. I do want to thank you for being part of our podcast family. Come to drcarolministries.com and leave me a message anytime. I love to hear from you. It also means a lot if you would share this program with others on social media, or tell your friends about it, or rate Relationship Prescriptions on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast that helps other people find it. That would really mean a great deal. Thank you for being part of our podcast family, and may God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Our purpose is to provide trustworthy resources that help you and others live fully alive in every way as God intended. If you would like to help others experience transformation in their lives and relationships, we invite you to partner with us. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to the number 512-980-1620. Or visit our website at drcarolministries.com/donate to make a one-time contribution or monthly gift. Your financial support allows us to expand our message and to help others. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.